Hey everyone, I've been working to improve the curb appeal of my home, and today I'll be working to add some stone veneer to the front of my porch. And here's a quick preview. Hey, I'm Dan, and my mom and I bought some land out in the countryside to build a house. And to help with that, we thought we should have a trailer. So why not renovate a 1949 Spartan manor? So if you want to see how these go, plus some other random DIY stuff, subscribe and follow along. Since this is all new to me, I'm just working on this first corner here. So this project has 5 main steps. There's cleaning the concrete, applying the primer, applying the scratch coat, putting on the stone veneer, and finally cleaning off the surface of the stone veneer. As you can see, this is going to stack about 4 of these high. For the corners, I want to do something like this where I interweave the pieces of stone, and so I'll have to cut these short. To cut this stone veneer, I did get this diamond blade, and these are so much cheaper at Harbor Freight than at Home Depot or Lowe's. And as you might be able to see there, it's ideal for slate. So I'm just going to use this piece of hard chalk that's from welding to mark the stone and then cut it with the diamond blade. This stuff does break apart very easily. Once I have 4 pairs of these, I'll be ready for the corner. And I doubt this will be very critical, but I'm going to label these so I know they're a pair. All right, there are my 4 sets of corner pieces, and you don't have to cut the lines perfectly straight because these have quite a bit of texture on them anyway. The first step is to clean the concrete, and I'm going to use this wire brush, but if your concrete is particularly dirty or you have a large area to do, you might want to use an angle grinder with a wire wheel cup. As you can see, there's quite a bit of lichen I'll need to clean off before I start this. Even by hand, that's really dusty. You'll definitely want to have a mask. Here's that same area again, but after the wire brush, and you can see just how much cleaner it is. And that was really quite easy. One of the things I need to get rid of is this old water pipe, which doesn't do anything anymore. So apparently new concrete doesn't stick to old concrete very well unless you use something like this, an adhesive. So we're going to mix up a primer coat of this using 2 parts water and 1 part adhesive, and then we'll paint it onto the concrete. Okay, I just eyeballed that amount, so hopefully that's okay. That should be good. All right, now we let that dry for 2 to 3 hours. So that primer coat has dried, and now I'm going to put on a full strength layer of this. And the directions said to use gloves and glasses. So now we just let it dry, and it says to place the new concrete immediately once it dries. And here you can see it's drying really quickly. All right, I got this Quikrete mortar mix, and it says just add water. So I'll shovel some into this bucket and add water until it gets to a fairly thick, workable consistency. So I want to say a couple things about concrete, mortar, and cement because I was confused about these and it slowed me down. So cement is an ingredient that is in both mortar and concrete. So if you're anything like me, you've kind of used the terms concrete and cement interchangeably, but that would be like calling a loaf of bread flour. So concrete has cement, aggregates, which can be anything from sand up to stones, and water. And mortar has cement, lime, fine sand, and water. So very basically, concrete's really good for building strong structures, and mortar is good for sticking things like bricks together. So I've been kind of thinking of it as concrete being the walls of your gingerbread house, and the mortar is the icing that holds all the little candies on it. That's looking pretty good. All right, so it says an ideal consistency is when 1/2 inch of mortar will not fall off your trowel at a near vertical. That's pretty close, I'd say. Come here. I got new treats for you, but I have mortar that's all ready to go. I wasn't using this hawk very effectively, as you can see, so I ended up just using the trowel, which I think is actually a drywall tool, but it was a convenient size for this job. I didn't feel like spending 20 some odd dollars on a notch trowel that I would just probably use only for this project. So I bought this paint trimmer at Harbor Freight for a couple bucks and measured out some notches and cut them out on the table saw. There you go, my $2 notch trowel. All right, there's my scratch coat. All right, I probably used half or 2/3 of a bag just to cover those two sides. All right, so I've cut these two pieces of wood as guides for when I'm placing these on the wall. So I can put this one up against the bottom of the porch slab and make sure the top of that bottom row is against that. And then for the next one, I can do that. And then the next two are pretty easy from there. Now I'm putting about a 1/4 inch of mortar on the back, which is called back buttering. I didn't do it on the first few, but I took to wetting the back of the tile with water before putting on the mortar, as I understand that helps it to stick better. These pieces of stone veneer are relatively heavy, so they didn't stay up where I was putting them, and I ended up having to shim each one as I went, using my stick as a guide, which was kind of a pain. Well, that is my first row down. 3 more to go. So that first row was pretty stressful because I want to apply all of the stone veneer before the scratch coat dries. You'll get the strongest bond if the scratch coat is still wet when you're applying the tiles with the back butter. Because I was worried about the scratch coat drying, I actually sprayed it down a little bit here, although I'm not sure that's best practice. There we go. This whole side is done. And there's after a bit of a rinse and sponging down. Are you excited for the treats? Can you sit? All right, we're going back out. I thought wetting and scrubbing the veneer would clean off the mortar haze, but it didn't. So I read that a 50-50 mix of vinegar and water does the trick. Just apply it to the surface and let it stay wet for about 15 minutes, then go back in with brushes and sponges to scrub it away. This is a lot of work, and why I wish I had paid more attention when I was setting each row of the veneer. Once you're done scrubbing, rinse thoroughly. So you can see what a dramatic difference the vinegar made. So, initial thoughts after having done that corner. 1, that's a lot of work and I'm pretty tired. 2, I think the mix for my mortar wasn't quite wet enough for my scratch coat, and I think I got a better feel for it as I went along. 3, for the next sides, I'm gonna set the bottom row first. I just screw a piece of wood into the concrete to support that bottom row and do the scratch coat only to that height and set the whole bottom row and let it cure there first. Because that first row ended up being pretty stressful. So here I'm using a masonry bit and my hammer drill to install some wall anchors and secure the wood. And I'm using my height guide to ensure it's at the right distance from the overhang. So I wasn't able to put this wood at the very bottom because I couldn't get a good angle with the drill so far down. So instead, I'm putting it 3 rows down. I decided to skip the watered down primer coat and went straight to the full strength adhesive. I'm thinking that will be plenty strong for this project because it's not a very high wall. All right, I've got all the wood on and I put some masking tape on it just to make sure the mortar doesn't stick to it really well because I put that bonding agent, and that bonding agent is now dry on the concrete. So it's time to mix up some mortar and put on a scratch coat. So one thing I found when mixing the mortar is it does help to have a bit of water at the bottom of the bucket before you put the mortar in. Before, I was using my cordless drill to mix the mortar, but it's much easier with this larger, more powerful corded model. I think it's pretty good. Let's give this a try. I'm gonna start in the corner again, and I already have my 2 corner tiles cut. So much easier with that ledge. And I'm scraping it off above it because I don't want a super thick layer when I put the next scratch coat on. I'm just gonna double check the spacing. Looking good. And of course, I had to cut the last tile in each row to fit against the stairs. All right, last one for this row. So I noticed this after I brought 12 of these boxes home, and I'm not really sure what it means to be interior or indoor stone. The only thing I could figure is that maybe the adhesive holding all these pieces together isn't rated for outdoors, but I'm not worried about that deteriorating because this is going to be held to the concrete over there with all the mortar. So yeah, not sure why this slate veneer is indoor. From here, I just primed, applied the scratch coat, and placed the veneer one row at a time. It took a few hours for each row, so I just did one row a day. I really recommend sponging off as much mortar as you can from the face of the veneer because it's a lot harder to get off once it's dry. If I were to do this again, I'd take more time on this step and use a brush to get it out of corners. I didn't want to spray it directly with the hose or apply too much pressure with the sponge because these were still setting up. I can't recommend enough wearing gloves while working with mortar. My hands get extremely dry afterwards when they're exposed to it. So sometimes I wore rubber and nitrile gloves. After putting the second row, I removed the screws holding the wood to the concrete and popped it off with a small scraper. To ensure the bottom row would go in well, I scraped away any excess mortar that might get in the way. A trade-off of just doing one row at a time was that applying the scratch coat was a bit more fiddly than doing the whole surface as I did initially. Here, the scraper would barely fit, and along the bottom I used it as a hawk and a small scraper to apply the mortar to the surface. That was slow. So doing one row at a time has been more relaxing, but it's been a little annoying setting everything up each time. So this very first row down here doesn't actually need to be full height. It could be missing one of these small rows. So let's see if I can take this last little row of thinner stones off. That worked okay, but I also split it there. This is the first one I got to come apart without splitting it down the middle, and you just really have to hammer it with conviction. Still broke. That one was so thin. So not great results here. Only about 5 of them broke really cleanly. The rest I'll have to piece back together. And I did have to use shims again, but at least I had the tiles above to push against, and they were already level. Here on the left side of the porch, I've left it like this because I might one day, once I forget how much work this is, extend the veneer down the entire side of this house. So overall, this project ended up costing me about $550 to cover about 60 square feet of my concrete with this stone veneer. About $475 was for 100 pieces of the stone veneer. About 30 was for 5 bags of mortar. Another 22 was for the concrete adhesive, and the rest was for gloves, the cutting disc, and the anchors and other little bits. So I'm really happy how this all turned out. And if you're thinking of doing something similar, I hope this video is helpful, and see you next time. Where's your ball? Where's your ball?